Marcus Rodriguez lay on a hospital bed, his dark eyes staring at the white ceiling tiles above him. The steady beeping of machines filled the silence, but he had learned to block out such sounds long ago. His left leg was wrapped in thick bandages, and the doctors had told him he was lucky to be alive. Lucky! He almost laughed at the word, but even that small movement sent pain shooting through his ribs. 3 weeks had passed since the explosion in Afghanistan. 3 weeks since his world had changed forever. The medical staff at Walter Reed Army Medical Center had tried everything to get him to cooperate with treatment, but Marcus remained as stubborn as a stone wall. He refused physical therapy, declined counseling sessions, and barely touched the food they brought him. The only thing he would accept was the minimum pain medication needed to keep him conscious. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, his primary physician, had tried every approach she could think of. She had explained the importance of early intervention, the risks of permanent disability, and the success rates of their rehabilitation programs. Marcus would listen politely, nod occasionally, and then continue to refuse treatment. His file was growing thick with notes from frustrated medical professionals who couldn't understand why a decorated Navy SEAL would choose to jeopardize his own recovery. The truth was simple, though Marcus would never admit it out loud. He didn't want to get better. Getting better meant facing the reality of what had happened during that mission. It meant accepting that 3 of his teammates hadn't made it home. It meant acknowledging that he had survived when better men than him had died. The guilt ate at him like acid, making every breath feel like a betrayal of their memory. His team leader, Chief Petty Officer James Tank Thompson, had been like a father to him. Tank had been the one to recommend Marcus for the SEAL program when he was just a young Marine looking for something more. He had guided Marcus through the grueling training, been there for his first real combat mission, and had saved his life more times than he could count. Now Tank was gone, along with Rodriguez and McKinley, and Marcus was lying in a comfortable hospital bed while their families planned funerals. The mission had been routine, at least as routine as any mission could be in a war zone. Intelligence had indicated that a high-value target was hiding in a compound near Kandahar. The plan was simple: get in, capture or eliminate the target, and get out. They had done it dozens of times before, but this time had been different. This time, someone had been waiting for them. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to push away the memories, but they came anyway. He could still hear Tank's voice over the radio, calm and professional even as the situation deteriorated around them. He could still smell the smoke and dust, still feel the heat from the explosion that had brought down half the building. He had been thrown clear by the blast, his body slamming into a concrete wall with enough force to crack 3 ribs and shatter his left femur. When he had regained consciousness, the compound was silent except for the crackling of flames and the distant sound of approaching helicopters. The rescue team had found him first, probably because he had been thrown the farthest from the blast site. By the time they reached his teammates, it was too late. Tank, Rodriguez, and McKinley had all been caught in the secondary explosion when the building support structure finally gave way. Marcus had been conscious enough to see them loading the body bags into the helicopter, conscious enough to count them, conscious enough to realize that he was the only one going home alive. A soft knock on his door interrupted his dark thoughts. Marcus didn't bother to look up, assuming it was another doctor or therapist ready to waste their time, and he had become quite skilled at tuning out their well-meaning speeches about recovery and moving forward. But instead of the usual professional greeting, he heard a young woman's voice. "Good afternoon, Petty Officer Rodriguez. My name is Emily Chun, and I'll be your nurse for this shift." Marcus glanced toward the door and saw a small Asian woman in scrubs, probably in her early 20s. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a tablet against her chest like a shield. Great, he thought, another rookie who thinks she can fix him with kindness and persistence. He had been through at least a dozen nurses in the past 3 weeks. Some had tried the tough love approach. Others had been overly sympathetic, but none of them had lasted long. Marcus had a talent for making people give up on him. "I'm not interested in whatever speech you've prepared," Marcus said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Just change whatever needs changing and leave me alone." Emily nodded, but she didn't seem discouraged. She moved efficiently around the room, checking his adjusting his blankets, and making notes on her tablet. Her movements were precise and practiced despite her obvious nervousness. Marcus found himself watching her work, curious despite himself. Most of the other nurses had tried to engage him in conversation immediately, but Emily seemed content to focus on her tasks. "Your vitals look good," she said after a few minutes. "Pain level. Fine, Marcus lead." Emily looked at him directly for the first time, and Marcus was surprised by the intelligence he saw in her dark eyes. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push the issue either. Instead, she made another note on her tablet and continued with her routine. "I see you're scheduled for physical therapy this afternoon," she said casually. "I'm not going. I figured as much. The therapist called to say you've missed the last 8 appointments." Marcus waited for the lecture about the importance of rehabilitation, but it never came. Emily simply continued her work, checking his bandages and monitoring his equipment. Her silence was more unnerving than any speech would have been. Most people couldn't handle quiet, especially uncomfortable quiet, but Emily seemed perfectly at ease with it. "Are you going to try to convince me?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Emily looked up from her tablet. "Convince you of what?" "To cooperate. To try harder. To think about my future. Do you want to be convinced?" The question caught Marcus off guard. No one had asked him what he wanted in weeks. They had all assumed they knew what was best for him, what he needed to hear, what would motivate him to change. But Emily was asking him directly, and her tone suggested that his answer actually mattered to her. "No," he said honestly. "Then I won't waste either of our time." Emily finished her tasks and headed toward the door, but something made her pause. She turned back to look at Marcus, her expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Marcus shrugged. "Sure. What's the worst part? The physical pain or something else?" It was such a direct question that Marcus found himself answering before he could stop himself. "The something else." Emily nodded as if she had expected that answer. "I thought so. Physical wounds heal, even when they're severe. It's the other kind that can kill you." She left without another word, leaving Marcus staring at the closed door. In all his weeks at the hospital, no one had acknowledged that his real injuries weren't visible on any X-ray or MRI. Everyone had focused on his leg, his ribs, his recovery timeline. Emily was the first person to recognize that he was bleeding from wounds that couldn't be bandaged or sutured. The afternoon passed slowly. Marcus turned down his scheduled physical therapy session and ignored the concerned visit from the hospital chaplain. He picked at his dinner and pretended to sleep when Dr. Mitchell stopped by for her evening rounds. By the time Emily returned for the night shift, Marcus had convinced himself that their earlier conversation had been a fluke, that she would revert to the standard approach of encouragement and persistent optimism. But Emily surprised him again. She went about her duties with the same quiet efficiency, checking his vitals and administering his medications without unnecessary chatter. It wasn't until she was preparing to leave that she spoke to him directly. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said, standing at the foot of his bed. "I've read your file, and I know about your team. I know you think you don't deserve to get better while they're gone. But I also know that letting yourself waste away isn't going to bring them back or honor their memory." Marcus felt anger flare in his chest. "You don't know anything about it." "You're right," Emily said calmly. "I don't know what it's like to lose people you care about in combat. I don't know what it's like to survive when others don't. But I do know what it's like to watch someone destroy themselves because they can't handle the guilt of being alive." Her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at her, seeing something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. Pain. Old pain, the kind that never fully heals but teaches you how to carry it. "My brother," Emily said quietly, as if she could read his thoughts. "Car accident when I was 17. I was supposed to be in the car with him, but I stayed home to study for a test. For 2 years, I wished I had died instead of him. I nearly made that wish come true." Marcus felt his anger drain away, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. Sympathy, maybe a recognition. Here was someone who understood the weight of survivor's guilt, who had felt the crushing burden of being alive when someone you loved was dead. "How did you?" Marcus started to ask, then stopped. "How'd I get past it?" Emily finished. "I realized that destroying myself wasn't going to change what happened. It wasn't going to bring Danny back or make my parents feel better. It was just going to add another tragedy to an already tragic situation." She moved closer to his bed, her expression gentle but determined. "Your teammates died, serving their country, protecting people like me. Do you really think they would want you to give up? Do you think they would want their sacrifice to mean that the world lost 4 good men instead of 3? Marcus felt tears threatening for the first time since the explosion. He blinked them back, but Emily had seen them. She didn't comment on it, didn't try to comfort him. She just stood there, giving him space to process her words. I can't, Marcus whispered. You can't what? I can't just move on like nothing happened. I can't pretend everything is fine. I'm not asking you to, Emily said. I'm asking you to honor their memory by living, by getting better, by making sure their sacrifice meant something. She left then, giving Marcus time alone with his thoughts. For the first time in weeks, he found himself thinking about something other than the explosion and his guilt. He thought about Tank, about the kind of man he had been. Tank wouldn't want Marcus to waste away in a hospital bed. He would want him to heal, to get strong, to continue serving in whatever way he could. But knowing what Tank would want and actually doing it were two different things. Marcus had built walls around his heart, walls designed to keep out hope and healing and the possibility of moving forward. Emily had managed to crack those walls, but breaking them down completely would require more strength than he was sure he possessed. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself looking forward to Emily's return. She came by every few hours to check on him, always professional, but never distant. She didn't try to force conversation, but she was available if he needed to talk. There was something comforting about her presence, something that made the darkness seem less overwhelming. Around 3 in the morning, when the hospital was at its quietest, Emily sat down in the chair beside his bed during her break. Can I tell you about Danny? She asked. Marcus nodded, grateful for any distraction from his own thoughts. He was 2 years older than me, and he was everything I wasn't. Outgoing, popular, confident. Everyone loved him. He was going to be a teacher, wanted to work with kids who had learning disabilities like he did. The night he died, he was coming to pick me up from study group. I had called him because I was worried about walking to my car alone. Emily's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the old pain underneath it. The other driver was drunk. He ran a red light and hit Danny's car at 60 miles an hour. Danny died instantly. The drunk driver walked away without a scratch. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and he meant it. For a long time, I blamed myself. If I hadn't called him, if I had just walked to my car like I did every other night, he would still be alive. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything. I dropped out of school and spent my days sitting in his room, surrounded by his things, waiting to die. What changed? Marcus asked. Emily smiled sadly. My mom. She came into Danny's room one day and found me there, and she just lost it. Not at me, but at the situation. She screamed about how unfair it was that she had lost one child and was watching the other one disappear. She said that Danny had died trying to help me, and I was making his death meaningless by giving up on life. Marcus could see where this story was going, but he let Emily continue. She was right. Danny had always been the protector, always looking out for me. Destroying myself wasn't honoring his memory. It was spitting on it. So I made a choice. I chose to live not just for me, but for him. I went back to school, changed my major to nursing, and decided to spend my life helping people the way Danny would have. That's why you do this, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Partly. But also because I'm good at it, and because it gives my life meaning. I can't save everyone, but I can try. I can be there for people when they're at their lowest point, the way I wish someone had been there for me. Emily looked directly at him. Your teammates can't speak for themselves anymore, but if they could, what do you think they would tell you? Marcus closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he let himself really think about Tank, Rodriguez, and McKinley. Not about their deaths, but about their lives. About the kind of men they had been, the values they had held, the way they had lived every day. Tank would tell him to quit feeling sorry for himself and get back to work. Rodriguez would probably make some joke about Marcus being too ugly to die and then get serious about the importance of pushing through adversity. McKinley, the youngest of their group, would remind him that life was precious and shouldn't be wasted. They'd tell me to stop being an idiot, Marcus said finally. Emily smiled. Sounds like they were smart men. The smartest I ever knew. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Marcus felt something shifting inside him, a tiny crack in the wall he had built around his heart. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Emily, he said as she prepared to leave. Yes. Tomorrow, when a physical therapist comes. I'll go. Emily's smile was radiant. Good. It's going to hurt, physically and emotionally. Recovery always does. But you're stronger than you think, and you're not alone in this. After she left, Marcus lay awake until dawn, thinking about her words and about his teammates. For the first time since the explosion, He allowed himself to imagine a future beyond these hospital walls. It was terrifying and hopeful at the same time, but it was something, and something was infinitely better than the nothing he had been living with. When a morning shift arrived, Marcus was already awake and alert. He ate his breakfast, answered the doctor's questions honestly, and when the physical therapist arrived, he was ready. It was just the first step on what would be a long and difficult journey, but Emily had shown him that the journey was possible. More importantly, she had shown him that he owed it to Tank, Rodriguez, and McKinley to try. The wounded SEAL was finally ready to begin healing one small step at a time. The physical therapy session was brutal. Marcus had expected pain, but he hadn't anticipated the humiliation of struggling with tasks that would have been laughably easy just a month ago. His left leg, once capable of carrying him through 20-mile marches with full gear, could barely support his weight for more than a few minutes. The therapist, a cheerful woman named Karen who clearly had experience with difficult patients, guided him through basic exercises with patient encouragement. "Don't try to do too much too fast," Karen advised as Marcus gritted his teeth through a simple leg lift. "Your body needs time to remember how to work properly." Marcus wanted to snap back that his body knew exactly how to work, that it was his mind that was the problem. But Emily's words from the night before echoed in his memory, and he forced himself to nod and continue with the exercise. Every movement sent fire through his injured leg, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest when he thought about how disappointed Tank would be to see him struggling with such basic movements. After the session, Marcus was exhausted and discouraged. He had managed only 15 minutes of exercises that would have been a warm-up in his previous life. Karen assured him that this was normal, that everyone started somewhere, but her words felt hollow. He wasn't everyone. He was supposed to be elite, unbreakable, always ready for whatever challenge came his way. Emily found him that afternoon, staring out his window at the parking lot below, his lunch untouched on the bedside table. She didn't say anything at first, just went about her routine of checking his vitals and updating his chart. When she finished, she pulled up the chair beside his bed and sat down. "Rough morning?" she asked. Marcus shrugged. "I couldn't even do the basic exercises. A year ago, I could run 5 miles and then do an hour of strength training without breaking a sweat. Now I can barely lift my own leg." "Progress isn't always linear," Emily said. "Sometimes it feels like you're moving backward, even when you're actually moving forward. That's easy to say when you're not the one falling apart." Emily was quiet for a moment, and Marcus glanced over to see her looking thoughtful. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. "Can I tell you something about the day Danny died?" Marcus nodded, curious despite his frustration. "The funeral was 3 days later. I tried to speak at the service to say something meaningful about who he was and what he meant to our family. I had written this beautiful speech about his kindness and his dreams and how much everyone loved him." Emily paused, a sad smile crossing her face. "I made it exactly 2 sentences before I broke down completely. I mean, ugly, crying, hyperventilating, the whole thing. I was so embarrassed that I ran out of the church and hid in the bathroom until the whole thing was over." "That's understandable," Marcus said. "You were grieving." "I was. But here's the thing I didn't realize until much later. My mom told me that those 2 sentences, that breakdown, that moment of raw emotion, meant more to everyone there than any perfect speech could have. It showed them how much Danny mattered, how deeply he was loved. Sometimes our weakest moments are actually our most human ones." Marcus considered her words. "What's your point?" "My point is that struggling doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. The fact that you're frustrated with your progress means you care about getting better. That's actually a good sign." Emily reached over and picked up his untouched sandwich. "Eat this. Your body needs fuel to heal, and sulking on an empty stomach isn't going to help anyone." Despite himself, Marcus found his lips twitching into what might have been a smile. "Yes, ma'am." As the days passed, Marcus settled into a routine. Physical therapy in the morning, which gradually became less torturous as his strength slowly returned. Lunch, followed by occupational therapy sessions designed to help him adapt to the limitations his injuries might cause. Afternoons were for rest and the occasional visit from Dr. Mitchell, who seemed pleased with his newfound cooperation, but wisely didn't comment on the dramatic change in his attitude. Emily worked the night shift, which meant she was there during the hours when the hospital was quiet and Marcus's thoughts had a tendency to turn dark. She had a gift for knowing when he needed to talk and when he needed silence, when to push him and when to give him space. Sometimes she would sit with him during her breaks, and they would discuss books or movies or anything except war and injury and loss. Other times, she would sense his mood and simply go about her work with quiet efficiency, her presence a comforting constant in the chaos of his recovery. It was during one of these quiet evenings, about 2 weeks into his newfound cooperation with treatment, that Marcus finally worked up the courage to ask Emily about something that had been bothering him since their first real conversation. "How did you know?" he asked as she adjusted his four. "Know what? That first night when you said physical wounds heal, but the other kind can kill you. How did you know that was the real problem?" Emily finished with the four before answering. "Honestly, lucky guess. But also, I've seen enough patients to recognize the signs. You were healing physically ahead of schedule, actually. Your body was doing what it was supposed to do. But you were fighting the healing process with everything you had. That usually means the real injury isn't visible on an x-ray. What gave it away? Your eyes, mostly. Physical pain has a different look than emotional pain. Physical pain is sharp, immediate. It comes and goes with movement or medication. The look you had was deeper than that. It was the look of someone who was hurting all the time, even when nothing was touching you. Marcus absorbed this. You're pretty smart for a rookie nurse. Emily laughed. Thanks, I think. Though I should probably mention that I'm not actually a rookie. I've been doing this for 3 years. I just started working with military patients recently, so I'm new to this unit. Why the switch? Emily's expression grew serious. Because military patients present unique challenges. The physical injuries are often severe, but it's the psychological component that makes the job interesting. Soldiers are trained to push through pain, to never give up, to always complete the mission. That makes them incredibly strong patients in some ways, but it also means they often don't know how to process failure or vulnerability. You mean we don't know how to be human? Marcus said. I mean, you sometimes forget that being human doesn't make you weak. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Marcus could hear raised voices and the sound of someone arguing with the nursing staff. Emily frowned and moved toward the door to investigate. I need to see him, a gruff voice was saying. I've been driving for 12 hours straight, and I'm not leaving until I talk to Rodriguez. Emily stepped into the hallway, and Marcus could hear her speaking in calm, professional tones. Sir, visiting hours ended 2 hours ago. I understand you come a long way, but the patient needs his rest. I don't care about visiting hours. I'm Master Chief Petty Officer William Sullivan, and Rodriguez is one of my men. I need to see him. Marcus felt his heart stop. Master Chief Sullivan had been Tank's mentor, the man who had trained their entire team. If he was here, it could only mean one thing. The Navy was ready to have a very serious conversation about Marcus's future, and it probably wasn't going to be pleasant. Emily returned to the room, her expression concerned. There's someone here who says he knows you. Master Chief Sullivan? He seems very determined to see you. Marcus closed his eyes. He had been dreading this moment since he arrived at the hospital. Sullivan represented everything Marcus used to be, everything he had failed to live up to. The last time they had spoken, Marcus had been a decorated SEAL with a bright future ahead of him. Now he was a broken man in a hospital bed, and he had no idea what he was going to say. Send him in, Marcus said quietly. Emily hesitated. Are you sure? You look pale. I could tell him to come back tomorrow during regular visiting hours. No, better to get this over with. Emily nodded and left to fetch the Master Chief. Marcus tried to prepare himself, but nothing could have readied him for the sight of William Sullivan filling the doorway. The man was exactly as Marcus remembered him, tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He looked older than Marcus remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a weariness that hadn't been there before. Sullivan stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. For a long moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Marcus waited for the disappointment, the lecture, the reminder of everything he had lost and everyone he had failed. Instead, Sullivan pulled up the visitor's chair and sat down heavily. You look like hell. Rodriguez, he said finally. Feel worse than I look, Master Chief. Sullivan nodded. I imagine you do. I came as soon as I heard you were finally cooperating with treatment. Took you long enough to pull your head out of your ass. Despite everything, Marcus found himself almost smiling. Sullivan had never been one to mince words. I'm sorry, Master Chief. About Tank, about Rodriguez and McKinley. About failing the mission. About stop, Sullivan interrupted. To stop right there. You think I came here to listen to you apologize for surviving? Marcus blinked, confused. Didn't you? Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. Son, I came here to make sure you weren't giving up. Tank called me before that last mission. Did you know that? Marcus shook his head. He was worried about you. Said you've been taking too many risks, pushing too hard. He thought you were trying to prove something to yourself or to the team. He asked me to keep an eye on you when you got back. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Tank had been worried about him, had seen something in his behavior that even Marcus hadn't recognized. He saw potential in you that even you don't see, Sullivan continued. That man never wasted his time on lost causes, and he sure as hell didn't waste it on you. He believed you had what it takes to be a leader, to carry on the traditions and values of this community. But I failed, Marcus said. I let my team down. You should have what? Died with them? You think that would have made Tank proud? You think that would have honored their sacrifice? Sullivan leaned forward, his intensity palpable. Let me tell you something about failure, Rodriguez. Failure is when you give up. Failure is when you let fear or guilt or pain stop you from becoming the man you're supposed to be. What happened to your team was a tragedy, but it wasn't a failure on your part. Sometimes good men die, and sometimes there's nothing you can do to stop it. The only choice you have is what you do afterward. Marcus felt tears threatening again, but this time he didn't try to stop them. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to live with this. You learn, Sullivan said simply. You get stronger. You honor their memory by becoming the best version of yourself that you can be. And when you're ready, you help other people do the same thing. What if I'm never ready? Then you'll spend your life running from ghosts instead of living for something meaningful. And Tank would be ashamed of that. The harsh words stung, but Marcus recognized the truth in them. He had been running from a memory of his teammates' deaths instead of running towards something that would honor their lives. He had been so focused on his guilt and pain that he had forgotten about the values they had shared, the commitment to service that had brought them together in the first place. Sullivan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Marcus, who unwrapped it carefully. Inside was Tank's challenge coin, the one he had carried through 3 combat deployments. Marcus had seen it hundreds of times, but holding it now felt like holding a piece of his fallen leader's soul. Tank's wife asked me to give this to you, Sullivan said. She said he would have wanted you to have it. Marcus stared at the coin, overwhelmed by the weight of the gesture. I can't take this. You can and you will, but understand what it means. It means you have a responsibility to live up to Tank's example. It means you have a duty to honor not just his memory, but the memory of every SEAL who has given their life in service to this country. Sullivan stood up, his expression serious but not unkind. I'm not going to lie to you, son. Recovery is going to be hard. Learning to live with survivor's guilt is going to be harder. But you're not alone in this fight. There are people who care about you, people who want to help. Don't be too proud to accept that help. After Sullivan left, Marcus lay in the darkness holding Tank's challenge coin and thinking about everything the Master Chief had said. For the first time since the explosion, he felt something other than guilt and pain. He felt purpose. It was small and fragile, but it was real. When Emily came to check on him later that night, she found him sitting up in bed, the challenge coin in his palm. How did it go? She asked gently. Better than I expected, Marcus said. He reminded me of some things I had forgotten. Such as, Marcus looked at the coin, then at Emily. That surviving doesn't make me a failure. That my teammates would want me to get better, to move forward. That hiding from life isn't honoring their memory. Emily smiled. Sounds like a smart man. The smartest. He also reminded me that I'm not alone in this. Emily nodded. You're not. Recovery is a team effort, and you've got a good team supporting you. Marcus thought about that as Emily continued her rounds. He did have a good team. Dr. Mitchell, who had never given up on him even when he had given up on himself. Karen, the physical therapist, who pushed him to work harder while understanding his limitations. The other staff members who had shown him patience and professionalism even when he had been difficult and uncooperative. And Emily, who had somehow known exactly what he needed to hear when he needed to hear it. Who had shared her own pain to help him process his. Who had shown him that healing was possible, even when it seemed impossible. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself thinking about the future for the first time in weeks. He didn't know what it would look like didn't know if he would ever be able to return to active duty or if he would need to find a new path forward. But for the first time, the uncertainty didn't terrify him. It felt like possibility. The wounded SEAL was beginning to understand that healing wasn't just about repairing his broken body. It was about rebuilding his broken spirit, reconnecting with his sense of purpose, and learning to carry the memory of his fallen teammates as a source of strength rather than a burden of guilt. It would be a long journey, but he was finally ready to take the next step. Marcus had been making steady progress for 3 weeks when a nightmare came back. He woke up screaming, his body drenched in sweat, the phantom sounds of the explosion still echoing in his ears. The night nurse on duty rushed in to find him sitting on the edge of his bed, hyperventilating and disoriented. "Where's Emily?" Marcus managed to gasp between labored breaths. "She's not on duty tonight," the nurse replied, her voice gentle but concerned. "My name is Jennifer. Can you tell me what's wrong?" Marcus shook his head, unable to explain the crushing weight on his chest or the way the walls seemed to be closing in around him. He had thought he was getting better, thought he had moved past the worst of his trauma. But the nightmare had been so vivid, so real, that he could still smell the smoke and hear Tank's voice calling out commands in the chaos. Jennifer tried her best to calm him, but Marcus couldn't seem to catch his breath. His heart was racing, and his hands were shaking so badly that he couldn't hold the cup of water she offered him. He felt like he was drowning, like the weight of his guilt and fear was pulling him under. "I need to call Dr. Mitchell," Jennifer said, reaching for the phone. "No," Marcus said quickly. "Please, just, can you call Emily? I know she's not supposed to be here, but I really need to talk to her." Jennifer hesitated. "I'm not sure I can ask her to come in on her night off for something like this." "Please," Marcus said again, and something in his voice must have convinced her. 20 minutes later, Emily appeared in his doorway, still in civilian clothes and looking worried. She took one look at Marcus and immediately understood what was happening. "PTSD episode?" she asked Jennifer, who nodded. Emily moved to Marcus's side and sat down on the bed beside him. "Look at me," she said firmly. "Focus on my voice and try to match my breathing." Marcus tried to follow her instructions, but his mind kept flashing back to the explosion, to the sight of his teammates' bodies being loaded into the helicopter. He felt like he was back there, trapped in that moment of helplessness and horror. "Tell me 5 things you can see in this room," Emily said, her voice cutting through his panic. I can't." "Yes, you can. Look around and tell me 5 things you can see right here, right now." Marcus forced himself to focus on his surroundings. The window, the 4 stand, your blue sweater, the clock on the wall, the flowers someone sent. Good. Now 4 things you can hear. Marcus listened carefully. The air conditioning, voices in the hallway, my heart beating, your voice. Emily continued guiding him through the grounding exercise until his breathing began to slow and his heart rate started to return to normal. When he was calm enough to speak coherently, she sent Jennifer away and pulled up the chair beside his bed. "Want to talk about it?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, struggling to find words for the terror that had consumed him. The nightmare. It was so real. I was back there, and I could hear Tank calling for help, but I couldn't move. I was trapped under the debris, and I could hear him screaming my name, but I couldn't get to him. Emily nodded. "That sounds terrifying." "The worst part is that it's not true. Tank never called for help. He never screamed my name. By the time I regained consciousness, he was already gone. My brain is making up scenarios that are somehow worse than what actually happened." "Trauma does that sometimes," Emily said. "Our minds try to process events that are too big, too overwhelming to understand. Sometimes that processing creates false memories or exaggerates real ones." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, frustrated with himself. "I thought I was getting better. I thought I had this under control." "Recovery isn't linear," Emily reminded him. "You're going to have good days and bad days, setbacks and breakthroughs. The fact that you had a nightmare doesn't erase all the progress you've made. It feels like it does." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she surprised him by sharing something she had never mentioned before. "I used to have nightmares about Danny's accident," she said. "Not about what actually happened, because I wasn't there. But my mind would create these elaborate scenarios where I was in the car with him, where I could have done something to prevent the crash or save his life afterward." Marcus looked at her with new understanding. "Did they ever go away?" "Eventually, but it took time, and it took help." I had to learn to separate what really happened from what my traumatized brain was trying to make me believe happened. Ow! Therapy. Medication for a while. But mostly I had to learn to forgive myself for surviving when he didn't. I had to accept that his death wasn't my fault, even though part of me will probably always wonder if things could have been different. Marcus considered her words. Dr. Mitchell had suggested therapy multiple times, but Marcus had always refused. The idea of talking to a stranger about his most painful memories felt impossible. But maybe it was time to reconsider. "Do you think therapy would help?" he asked. "I think it couldn't hurt." "And Marcus? I think you're ready for it now in a way you weren't before." "What's changed?" Emily smiled. "You're asking for help instead of refusing it. That's huge progress." The next morning, Marcus surprised Dr. Mitchell by asking about counseling services. She tried to hide her relief, but Marcus could see it in her eyes. Within hours, she had arranged for him to meet with Dr. James Patterson, a psychologist who specialized in military trauma. Dr. Patterson was nothing like what Marcus had expected. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. More importantly, he was a veteran himself, having served 2 tours in Vietnam before becoming a psychologist. "I understand you've been resistant to counseling," Dr. Patterson said during their first meeting. Marcus nodded. "I didn't think talking about it would help. I thought it would just make things worse." "What changed your mind?" Marcus thought about Emily's midnight visit, about the way she had guided him through his panic attack with patience and understanding. "Someone reminded me that I don't have to handle this alone." "That's a good start. Tell me about your team." For the first time since the explosion, Marcus found himself talking about Tank, Rodriguez, and McKinley not as victims of a tragedy, but as the remarkable men they had been. He told Dr. Patterson about Tank's leadership style, about Rodriguez's infectious sense of humor, about McKinley's determination to prove himself despite being the youngest member of the team. "They sound like extraordinary men," Dr. Patterson said when Marcus finished. "They were. They deserved to come home. And so did you." The simple statement hit Marcus harder than any lecture or argument could have. He had been carrying the assumption that his survival was somehow undeserved, that he should have died in place of his teammates. But Dr. Patterson's calm assertion that he, too, deserved to live challenged that fundamental belief. "I don't understand why I made it out when they didn't," Marcus said. "Sometimes there is no reason, no greater plan or purpose. Sometimes terrible things just happen, and looking for meaning in them will drive you insane. The only meaning you can control is what you choose to do with the life you've been given." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into his recovery with renewed determination. His sessions with Dr. Patterson helped him process his trauma and develop coping strategies for the guilt and anxiety that still plagued him. His physical therapy progressed to the point where he could walk short distances without crutches, though his left leg would never be quite the same as before. Emily continued to be his primary night nurse, and their conversations evolved from emergency interventions to genuine friendship. She told him more about her brother Danny, about her decision to become a nurse, about her hopes and dreams for the future. Marcus found himself sharing stories from his childhood, his reasons for joining the military, his uncertainty about what came next. "What do you want to do when you're discharged?" Emily asked one evening as she helped him with his exercises. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "The Navy is offering me a medical retirement, full benefits, and pension. I could go anywhere, do anything." "That sounds like freedom." "It sounds terrifying," Marcus said. "I've been in the military for 12 years. It's all I know. The structure, the mission, the sense of purpose. I don't know how to be a civilian." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "Have you considered that you don't have to stop serving? There are other ways to make a difference, other ways to honor your training and experience, such as teaching, training, helping other veterans navigate their own recovery, working with law enforcement or emergency services. The skills you learned as a SEAL aren't just useful in combat." Marcus had never considered these possibilities before. He had been so focused on what he was losing that he hadn't thought about what he might gain. The idea of using his experience to help others was appealing, but it also felt presumptuous. How could he help anyone else when he was still struggling to help himself? "I'm not sure I'm qualified to help anyone," he said. "You're more qualified than you realize. You've been through hell, and you're fighting your way back. That experience, that journey, is exactly what other people in similar situations need to see. They need to know that recovery is possible, that they're not alone, that there's hope even when everything seems hopeless." That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about Emily's words. For the first time since the explosion, he began to envision a future that wasn't defined by his trauma. He imagined himself working with other wounded veterans, sharing his story, helping them navigate the difficult path from injury to recovery. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it felt meaningful in a way that his old life never had. The next morning brought unexpected news. Dr. Mitchell arrived with paperwork and a serious expression that made Marcus's heart sink. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's fine," she assured him quickly. "Actually, everything's better than fine. Your recovery has progressed to the point where we can start discussing discharge planning." Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror. He had been in the hospital for almost 2 months. It had become his safe haven, a controlled environment where he didn't have to make major decisions about his future. The thought of leaving was both liberating and frightening. "How soon?" he asked. 2 weeks, possibly sooner if your physical therapy continues to progress at this rate. You'll need outpatient follow-up for both your physical injuries and your psychological care, but you'll be able to live independently. After Dr. Mitchell left, Marcus found himself feeling oddly emotional about the prospect of leaving. This place had been where he had hit rock bottom, but it had also been where he had started to rebuild himself. More importantly, it was where he had met Emily, and the thought of not seeing her every night was surprisingly difficult. When Emily arrived for her shift that evening, Marcus told her about his impending discharge. "That's wonderful news," she said, and Marcus could tell she meant it. "You've come so far from the man who refused treatment just 2 months ago." "I'm scared," Marcus admitted. "What if I can't handle it out there? What if I fall apart again?" Emily sat down beside his bed, her expression serious but encouraging. "You're not the same person who was brought here 2 months ago. You have tools now, coping strategies, a support system. You know how to ask for help when you need it. Most importantly, you want to get better. That's half the battle right there. What if the nightmares come back? What if I have another panic attack? Then you'll use the techniques Dr. Patterson taught you. You'll call your therapist or your support group. You'll remember that setbacks don't erase progress. They're just temporary obstacles to overcome." Marcus nodded, but he still felt uncertain. Emily seemed to sense his lingering doubts. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Of course. When I first went back to school after Danny died, I was terrified. I was convinced that I would fail, that I wasn't strong enough or smart enough to become a nurse. But my advisor told me something that stuck with me. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and moving forward anyway." "Is that what you did?" "Every single day for the first year. I was afraid I would break down in front of patients, afraid I would make a mistake that could hurt someone, afraid that I wasn't really cut out for this work. But I kept showing up, kept trying, kept pushing through the fear. And eventually, the fear became manageable. It never completely goes away, but it stops controlling your decisions." Marcus felt something shift inside him as he listened to her words. Emily was right. He would probably always carry some fear, some uncertainty about his ability to navigate life outside the military. But that didn't mean he was doomed to failure. It just meant he would have to be brave enough to try. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For showing me that recovery was possible. For being there when I needed someone most." Emily smiled, and Marcus thought he saw tears in her eyes. "Thank you for letting me help. For trusting me enough to be vulnerable. For showing me that sometimes the best way to heal yourself is to help someone else heal." As his discharge date approached, Marcus began to feel something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of early recovery, but a steady, grounded optimism about what the future might hold. He didn't know exactly what path he would take, but he knew he had the strength and support he needed to find his way. The wounded SEAL was ready to face the world outside the hospital walls, armed with new tools, new perspectives, and a renewed sense of purpose. Marcus's discharge day arrived sooner than expected. His physical therapy had progressed remarkably well, and Dr. Patterson felt confident that he had developed sufficient coping strategies to manage his PTSD in an outpatient setting. As he packed his few belongings, Marcus felt a strange mixture of excitement and melancholy. This hospital room had been his cocoon, the place where he had transformed from a broken man into someone ready to face the world again. Emily knocked on his door as he was folding his civilian clothes. She was carrying a small wrapped package and wearing the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thought you might like a going-away present," she said. handing him the package. Inside was a leather-bound journal with his initials embossed on the cover. Marcus ran his fingers over the smooth leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Dr. Patterson mentioned that journaling might help you process your thoughts and emotions as you transition back to civilian life, Emily explained. I thought you might like something nice to write in. Thank you. This is perfect. Marcus paused, then added, I'm going to miss our conversations. Me too, but this isn't goodbye forever. I expect you to stay in touch. Let me know how you're doing. Marcus nodded, though they both knew that wasn't always how these things worked. Patients moved on, started new lives, and the intensive relationships formed during recovery often faded into fond memories. But Emily had been more than just his nurse. She had been his lifeline during the darkest period of his life. Emily, he said as she prepared to leave, I need you to know something. That first night, when you asked me what the worst part was, you probably saved my life. I had given up on everything, but you made me believe that healing was possible. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You saved yourself, Marcus. I just reminded you that you were worth saving. An hour later, Marcus was sitting in the passenger seat of Master Chief Sullivan's truck, watching the hospital disappear in the side mirror. Sullivan had insisted on driving him to his new apartment, a small place near the VA medical center where he would continue his outpatient treatment. Nervous? Sullivan asked. Terrified, Marcus answered honestly. Sullivan chuckled. Good. Means you're taking this seriously. The easy part is over, son. Now comes the real work. Marcus's new apartment was sparse, but clean, furnished with the basics through a program for transitioning veterans. As Sullivan helped him carry in his few belongings, Marcus tried to imagine making this place feel like home. It seemed impossible after spending so many years living in barracks or deployed quarters where home was wherever his team was stationed. Place has potential, Sullivan said, looking around the small living room. It's fine, Marcus replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that seemed to permeate the space. Sullivan sat down on the couch and gestured for Marcus to join him. I want to talk to you about something. You remember Colonel Harrison from your time at Coronado? Marcus nodded. Colonel Harrison had been the commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center when Marcus went through SEAL training. He's got a new assignment. He's been tasked with developing a program to help transitioning special operations personnel adjust to civilian life. It's part therapy, part job training, part mentorship. He's looking for someone with recent experience to help design and implement the program. Marcus felt a flutter of interest. Someone like me? Someone exactly like you. Someone who's been through the process, who understands the challenges, who can relate to what these guys are going through. It would be a civilian position, but you'd be working with military personnel. I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that. Sullivan fixed him with a stern look. Stop selling yourself short. You have 12 years of military experience, recent first-hand knowledge of trauma recovery, and a perspective that could help save lives. Colonel Harrison specifically asked for you when he heard about your progress. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected opportunity. It wasn't the future he had imagined, but it felt right in a way that surprised him. What would I be doing exactly? Helping design curriculum, facilitating group sessions, providing one-on-one mentoring. Basically, being the person for other veterans that Emily was for you. The comparison to Emily hit Marcus powerfully. She had changed his life by believing in him when he couldn't believe in himself, by showing him that recovery was possible. The idea of paying that forward, of helping other veterans find their way through similar struggles, was both humbling and inspiring. When would it start? Colonel Harrison wants to meet with you next week. If you're interested. Marcus thought about Tank's challenge coin, which he now carried in his pocket every day. He thought about Rodriguez and McKinley, about the values they had shared and the commitment to service that had brought them together. He thought about Emily's words about finding new ways to serve. I'm interested, he said. Sullivan smiled. Good. I'll set up the meeting. After Sullivan left, Marcus found himself alone in his new apartment for the first time since his injury. The silence was oppressive, nothing like the comfortable quiet he had shared with Emily during their late-night conversations. He unpacked his few belongings, trying to make the space feel more personal, but everything he owned could fit in 2 duffel bags. As evening approached, Marcus felt anxiety building in his chest. The hospital had provided structure, routine, constant interaction with staff and other patients. Here, he was responsible for managing his own time, his own triggers, his own emotional state. The freedom was overwhelming. He ordered takeout for dinner, and try to watch television, but his mind kept wandering. He thought about his teammates, wondered what they would think of his new life. He thought about Emily, probably starting her shift at the hospital, caring for some new patient who needed her guidance and compassion. He thought about the program Colonel Harrison was developing and whether he was really capable of helping other people when he still felt so unsure of himself. Around 9 o'clock, his phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus felt a surge of relief. "How's the new place?" she asked. "Quiet," Marcus said. "Really quiet. Adjustment is always hard. Are you doing okay?" Marcus considered lying, saying he was fine, but Emily had earned his honesty. "I'm struggling a bit. It's weird being alone after 2 months of constant supervision and interaction. That's completely normal. Do you remember the grounding techniques we practiced?" Marcus did remember. Emily had taught him several ways to manage anxiety when it threatened to overwhelm him. He had practiced them in the hospital, but using them in his own apartment felt different, more challenging. "I remember," he said. "Good. And Marcus? You're not as alone as you think. Dr. Patterson is just a phone call away. You have Sullivan's number, and you can always reach me if you need to talk." "Thank you. That helps." They talked for another 20 minutes about his day, his apartment, his upcoming meeting with Colonel Harrison. By the time they hung up, Marcus felt calmer, more grounded. Emily was right. He wasn't alone, even when he felt isolated. The next few days passed slowly. Marcus attended his first outpatient session with Dr. Patterson, who seemed pleased with his adjustments so far. He visited the VA Medical Center to familiarize himself with the resources available to him. He even managed to have dinner with another veteran he met in group therapy, a former Marine named David who was dealing with similar challenges. But it was the meeting with Colonel Harrison that truly changed his perspective on his future. The colonel was a tall, distinguished man with graying hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. His office was decorated with military memorabilia and photos of various special operations units, creating an atmosphere that felt familiar and comforting to Marcus. "Petty Officer Rodriguez," Colonel Harrison said as Marcus entered. "Or should I say, Mr. Rodriguez now. Thank you for coming. Thank you for considering me, sir." Colonel Harrison gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Master Chief Sullivan speaks very highly of you. He tells me you've made remarkable progress in your recovery. I've had a lot of help, sir. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need for this program. Too many veterans try to handle their transition alone, and too many of them struggle unnecessarily as a result." The colonel went on to explain the program in detail. It would be called Operation New Dawn, and it would provide comprehensive support for special operations personnel transitioning to civilian life. The program would include psychological counseling, job training, educational support, and peer mentoring. Marcus would be responsible for developing the peer mentoring component and serving as a primary mentor for program participants. The idea is to pair transitioning veterans with someone who has been through similar experiences, Colonel Harrison explained. Someone who can provide practical advice, emotional support, and proof that successful transition is possible. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of uncertainty. "Sir, I'm still working through my own issues. I'm not sure I'm the right person to be mentoring others." Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Can I tell you something about leadership, Rodriguez? The best leaders aren't the ones who have never struggled. They're the ones who have faced adversity, learned from it, and used that experience to help others overcome similar challenges. But what if I can't help them? What if I say the wrong thing or give bad advice? Then you'll learn from those mistakes and do better next time. That's how growth happens. Besides, you won't be working alone. You'll have support from psychologists, social workers, career counselors. Your job is to be the living proof that recovery and successful transition are possible." Marcus thought about Emily, about how her willingness to share her own struggles had helped him believe in his own capacity for healing. Maybe Colonel Harrison was right. Maybe his experiences, painful as they were, could be transformed into something that helped other people. "What would you need from me?" Marcus asked. "Honesty, authenticity, a willingness to be vulnerable when it serves the mission. These men and women need to see that someone who has been where they are has made it through to the other side." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced since before the explosion. This wasn't the life he had planned, but it felt like the life he was meant to live. "When do we start?" he asked. Colonel Harrison smiled. "How about Monday?" That evening, Marcus called Emily to tell her about his new job. She listened as he described the program and his role in it, asking thoughtful questions and offering encouragement. "This sounds perfect for you," she said when he finished. "I'm nervous about it. What if I'm not good at mentoring? What if I can't help anyone?" "Marcus, do you remember our first real conversation? When I told you about Danny and about my own struggles with survivor's guilt?" "Of course. Do you remember how that made you feel?" Marcus thought about it. Like I wasn't alone. Like someone understood what I was going through. "Exactly. That's what you'll be providing to other veterans. Not solutions or magic fixes, but understanding and proof that healing is possible. Trust me, that's exactly what they'll need." As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he pulled out the journal Emily had given him and wrote his first entry. He wrote about his fear and excitement about the new job, about his gratitude for the people who had helped him heal, about his hope that he could pay forward the kindness and wisdom he had received. For the first time since the explosion, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. His journey from wounded warrior to healer was just beginning, but he finally understood that his experiences, both the traumatic and the transformative, had prepared him for something meaningful and important. The wounded SEAL was ready to become a wounded healer, using his scars as a roadmap to help others find their own path to recovery. 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of a group of 12 veterans in a conference room at the VA Medical Center. Operation New Dawn had officially launched 3 months earlier, and Marcus had already worked with over 30 transitioning service members. Each person brought their own unique challenges and circumstances, but they all shared the same fundamental struggle: learning how to rebuild their identity and purpose outside the military. "Today I want to talk about something that might make some of you uncomfortable," Marcus said to the group. "I want to talk about asking for help." A few of the veterans shifted in their seats. Marcus recognized the skepticism in their eyes, the resistance to appearing weak or vulnerable. He had worn that same expression during his first weeks in a hospital. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus continued. "You've been trained to be self-reliant, to push through pain, to never quit. Those are good qualities that serve you well in the military. But they can also become obstacles to recovery and growth if you don't learn when to set them aside." Marcus walked to the front of the room and sat on the edge of the desk, making himself more accessible, less formal. "When I was first injured, I refused treatment for 3 weeks. I was convinced that accepting help was a sign of weakness, that a real SEAL should be able to handle anything on his own. I was wrong, and that stubbornness nearly cost me everything." He pulled Tank's challenge coin from his pocket and held it up for the group to see. Over the past few months, he had learned to use his teammates' memory as a source of strength rather than guilt. "This belonged to my team leader, a man named Tank Thompson. Tank was one of the strongest people I ever knew, but he was also smart enough to know when to ask for backup. He taught me that real strength isn't about handling everything alone. It's about knowing when to lean on your team." A young Marine named Jackson raised his hand. Marcus had been working with Jackson for 2 weeks, and he was one of the more resistant participants in the program. "What if you don't have a team anymore?" Jackson asked. "What if everyone you trusted is gone or doesn't understand what you're going through?" It was a question Marcus had struggled with himself, and he knew it was at the heart of many veterans' transition difficulties. "Then you build a new team," Marcus said simply. "It might not look like your military team, but it can be just as strong and just as important. Therapists, family members, fellow veterans, mentors, friends. The people who make up your support network don't all have to be warriors, but they all have to care about your success." After the session ended, Jackson lingered behind while the other participants filed out. Marcus had learned to recognize this behavior. It usually meant someone wanted to talk privately, but wasn't sure how to start the conversation. "Something on your mind, Jackson?" Marcus asked. "I've been thinking about what you said about building a new team, but what if you don't know how? What if you've spent so many years in the military that you don't remember how to make civilian friends?" Marcus smiled. "That's a fair question, and it's more common than you might think. Want to grab some coffee and talk about it?" They walked to a small cafe near the medical center, a place Marcus had discovered during his own early days of adjustment. Jackson was quiet for most of the walk, clearly wrestling with something he wasn't ready to share yet. "You know," Marcus said as they settled into a corner booth, "when I first got out of the hospital, I felt like I was living in a foreign country. Everything was familiar but different at the same time. I knew how to navigate military culture, but civilian life felt like speaking a language I had forgotten." Jackson nodded. "Exactly. People ask me what I do for work now, and I don't know how to explain that I spent 6 years as a sniper without sounding like a freak. They ask about my hobbies, and I realized that my hobbies were cleaning weapons and physical training. They want to talk about movies and sports, and all I can think about are firefights and IED sweeps. How long have you been out? Marcus asked. For months. I keep thinking it should be easier by now. Everyone keeps saying I should be grateful to be alive, to be home safe, but I just feel lost. Marcus remembered that feeling well. The disconnect between what other people thought he should feel and what he actually felt had been one of the most isolating aspects of his early recovery. Can I tell you about someone who helped me understand this better? Marcus asked. Jackson nodded. So Marcus told him about Emily, about her kindness, her patience, her willingness to share her own struggles in order to help him heal, about how she had shown him that vulnerability could be a form of strength. She sounds like an amazing person, Jackson said when Marcus finished. She is. But here's the thing I realized later. Emily didn't help me because she was perfect or because she had all the answers. She helped me because she was willing to be honest about her own pain and her own healing journey. And that honesty created a connection that made me feel less alone. Marcus leaned forward. The people who become part of your new team don't have to understand everything about your military experience, but they do have to be willing to listen, to care, and to walk alongside you while you figure things out. And you have to be willing to let them. How do you find people like that? Sometimes they find you. Sometimes you meet them in group therapy or at the VA. Sometimes they're neighbors or co-workers who surprise you with their compassion. But it starts with being open to the possibility that connection is possible, even when it feels impossible. Jackson was quiet for a moment, processing Marcus's words. Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Do you ever talk to that nurse? Emily. Marcus smiled. Actually, yes. We've stayed in touch. She's been dating a doctor from the hospital for the past few months, and she seems really happy. Does that bother you? The question caught Marcus off guard, but he realized it was a fair one. I thought it might. Emily was such an important part of my recovery, and there were definitely times when I wondered if my feelings for her went beyond gratitude. But when she told me about her new relationship, all I felt was happiness for her. She deserves good things in her life. That's mature of you. Marcus laughed. Took me a while to get there, but I realized that Emily wasn't just important to me because of who she was. She was important because of who she helped me become. That transformation doesn't disappear just because our circumstances change. They talked for another hour, with Jackson gradually opening up about his own struggles with isolation and identity confusion. By the time they parted ways, Jackson seemed more hopeful, more willing to engage with the program's resources. These kinds of conversations had become the most rewarding part of Marcus's new job. Each veteran brought unique challenges, but they all shared the fundamental human need for connection and purpose. Marcus had learned to see his role not as providing all the answers, but as helping people find their own path forward. That evening, Marcus attended a reception at Colonel Harrison's office. Operation New Dawn had been so successful that it was being expanded to 3 additional military medical centers. Marcus was being promoted to regional coordinator, which meant he would oversee peer mentoring programs at multiple facilities. I have to admit, I wasn't sure about this program when it was first proposed, said General Martinez, who had come to speak at the reception. But the results speak for themselves. The veterans who have participated in Operation New Dawn show significantly better outcomes in employment, education, and psychological adjustment compared to those who transition through traditional programs. Marcus felt a surge of pride, not just for his own contributions, but for all the veterans who had been brave enough to participate in the program. Success stories like Jackson's were becoming more common, but they still represented tremendous courage on the part of people who were learning to rebuild their lives from scratch. After the reception, Marcus drove to Arlington National Cemetery. It had become a monthly ritual for him, visiting the graves of Tank, Rodriguez, and McKinley. He no longer came here out of guilt or obligation, but out of love and respect for their memory. Hey, Tank, Marcus said as he stood before his team leader's headstone. Thought you want to know that the kid you believed in is finally figuring things out. He told Tank about Operation New Dawn, about the veterans he had helped, about the expanded program, and his new responsibilities. He talked about Emily and her happiness about DR. Patterson's continued guidance, about the life he was building piece by piece. I know you guys will be proud. Marcus said finally. "Not because I'm doing anything extraordinary, but because I'm doing what you taught me to do. I'm taking care of my team, even if it's a different kind of team now." As he walked back to his car, Marcus felt a sense of completion that had been building for months. He would never stop missing his fallen teammates, would never stop wishing things had been different. But he had finally learned to carry their memory as a source of strength rather than a burden of guilt. His phone buzzed with a text message from Emily. Saw the article about Operation New Dawn's expansion in the Military Times. "So proud of everything you've accomplished. Hope you're doing well." Marcus smiled as he typed back. "Thanks, Em. Couldn't have done it without the best nurse in the business showing me the way forward. Hope you and Dr. Peterson are happy." Her response came quickly. "We are. And Marcus, you were always stronger than you knew. I just help you remember that." As Marcus drove home to his apartment, which he had slowly made comfortable and personal over the past few months, he reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. A year ago, he had been a SEAL preparing for another deployment, certain of his identity and his future. The explosion had shattered that certainty, forcing him to rebuild everything from the ground up. But the man he had become was different from the man he had been, and Marcus was beginning to understand that different didn't necessarily mean worse. He was more compassionate now, more aware of his own vulnerabilities and limitations. He was better at connecting with people who were struggling, better at listening without trying to fix everything immediately. Most importantly, he had learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey, and that the journey was made bearable by the people who chose to walk alongside you. Emily had been his guide through the darkest part of that journey, but now he had the privilege of being that guide for others. When Marcus reached his apartment, he pulled out the journal Emily had given him and wrote his entry for the day. He wrote about Jackson's breakthrough, about the program's expansion, about his visit to Arlington. He wrote about gratitude and purpose and the unexpected ways that life could surprise you with hope just when you thought all hope was lost. He wrote about Tank, Rodriguez, and McKinley and how their memory had evolved from a source of pain to a source of inspiration. He wrote about Emily and the countless ways she had changed his life without probably even realizing it. And he wrote about tomorrow, about the new veterans who would be arriving at the program, about the opportunity to help them discover their own strength and resilience. The wounded SEAL had become a wounded healer, and he was finally at peace with the man he had become. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since before the explosion, genuine excitement about the future. He didn't know what specific challenges lay ahead, but he knew he had the tools and the support system to face them. The boy who had joined the Marines looking for purpose had become a man who had found it in the most unexpected place. His scars would always be with him, visible and invisible reminders of the price.